Hello, friends. Welcome to Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is Zero Trust in Action, Illumio's approach to ransomware defense with my friend Trevor Deering. How's it going, Trevor?
I'm very good, Joe. How are you?
Doing great. Trevor, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
So, as I said, my name is Trevor Deering. I am actually based just north of London in the UK, and I represent a company called Illumio. I focus on cybersecurity for critical infrastructure. Illumio themselves, we've been in business about 12 years now. We have customers in spaces like finance and banking, manufacturing, healthcare, and logistics. And what we do is really to prevent a cyber attack turning into a disaster. So we try and keep organizations in business should there be a cyber attack by fundamentally just containing that attack into a small space.
Yeah, you guys have, I've heard lots of people talk about cybersecurity. You guys have a unique approach to it. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I guess if you look back over the history of cybersecurity, I've been doing this for 37 years, which is pretty much when cybersecurity was invented. And in that time, we've really focused on reducing the probability that an attack could be successful. And we've done quite a good job. We've reduced that by about 99%. The challenge is that there's still a 1% chance that an attack is going to be successful. So there's no way you're going to reduce that to zero. So the challenge is that trying to reduce that more is getting more and more expensive. And so it's a law of diminishing returns. So the thing that you can do now to get a much sort of better reduction in risk quicker is to mitigate the impact of the attack, reduce what happens when there is an attack. And that involves a couple of things like planning your incident response. So what happens when that attack takes place? And what we do fundamentally is, as we said, is to reduce what they call the blast radius, stop the attack moving. So it's a bit, as we said, it's a bit like if someone breaks into your house, we keep them locked in the first room they get into. So we're making sure that we're solving small problems rather than big problems, that maybe 4 or 5 servers or applications get impacted and not 4 or 5,000.
So you're discovering it soon and then hopefully keeping it to the smallest, as you said, blast radius. I love that analogy because one of the challenges, and I'm not a technical guy, but is them going from, however they got into your system and then just moving from place to place, becoming more and more dangerous for your business.
Yeah, because if you think about it, there are certain aspects within the business that the business absolutely relies on. And then there are others where they may not necessarily. So it could be catering or whatever it happens to be. And so what you want to do is make sure that what people call the crown jewels, your most critical assets, are very well protected so that if there is an attack, that's not affected. So you can stay in business and you can recover quicker. Because if you can identify, detect, and respond quicker, then the chances that you're going to stay in business become much higher.
Yep. We'll get to some of these more definitions in a minute. But first one, what is Zero Trust?
So Zero Trust, it's a concept or an approach that was developed 15 years ago by who was at the time a Forrester analyst called John Kindervag. And for years, people had spoken about the fact that your computer environment was like an M&M. It was crunchy on the outside and soft in the middle so that things could move around. But his approach was actually, it shouldn't be like that. It should be crispy on the outside and crispy in the middle. So really about making sure that you're, understanding what's happening before anything can communicate. So it's a bit like I received a text the other day and it said, "Hello, Mum, I've got a new phone number," which was wrong on so many levels, obviously. And I knew that my kids wouldn't do that and things like that. And then you get other texts saying, "Oh, hi, this is bank security. There's been an attack. We think you've got corrupted. Click on this link." So things like that, you just don't trust. you would go, and if you're going to contact the bank, you're going to look up the bank phone number and phone them up and ask them. So that's a sort of a zero trust approach to your life, which everyone should take. But then when you translate that into business, you're saying, okay, I've got a connection or a connection to a supplier, and that supplier may be very secure, but I need to make sure that if anything comes from there, it's not going to impact my business. So you take that approach of zero trust. So it's an approach as opposed to a technology.
Yes. So I know you're in Europe. I'm here in the States. One thing that a lot of Europeans will notice when they come to the United States is when they go to a restaurant and they give them a credit card, and the server takes the credit card in the back or to the register, scans it and brings it back. And my sister was living overseas, and she came home and she said, they don't do that anywhere else. She says everywhere else they bring the machine to you. So nobody walks into the back room with your credit card. And we've done it for a long time. And for the most part, you can trust the servers, right? But why? If you do it 1,000 times, maybe you're good. But you do it 10,000 times, at some point, you're tempting fate when you have trust. And that's a horrible thing to say, but it's also the truth, especially when it comes to business.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it did horrify me for years where people took my credit card away, because it's actually illegal in Europe to do that. But now that we have contactless and phone payment, then that's that problem solved. But it's an interesting thing, because the challenge sometimes with zero trust is that when an organization says, oh, we're going to adopt a zero trust approach, people go, what, you mean you don't trust me? And that's not what it means. It's about verifying things before you allow them to happen.
And by the way, we've had here in the United States, and I'm sure it's everywhere around, challenge with freight fraud here, where stuff is getting taken, all sorts of situations. I always say it's the first cousin of cybersecurity. For a long time, I didn't have to worry. If I was a company and I'm working with Trevor, I've known Trevor for years. I talk to him on the phone. I even have his mobile phone. We text back and forth. But then, for efficiency's sake, we started using more technology. Now I might be working with a trucking company I don't know as well, and now all of a sudden I'm opened up to all sorts of problems. Now, we can never go back. I can never go back to the place where I say, yeah, I know Trevor. I don't have to check anything. No, nobody's doing that anymore. And somebody asked me a year ago, how would you right now, if you had to stop cybersecurity or freight fraud? I said, I would talk to everyone I work with on the phone. I said, you usually don't get defrauded by people you've been working with for 5-10 years, but it's just, can I scale that? Slowly. Anyway, we'll get into more of this in a minute. But Trevor, first tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you joined Illumio.
So I was born and grew up in London, and obviously went to school in London and went to college in London. And I've been in this industry now for the whole telecoms industry for about 43 years. I started off commissioning telephone exchanges and building control systems for telephone exchanges. And because I've been in the industry that long, I can start to say things like, when the PC was invented and we started to install that, and networks were invented and we did that. Yeah, I installed some of the first networks in Europe. Again, when the firewall was invented, installed some of the first firewalls. So I've always worked on what is new technology in some of those things. So I've done engineering, development, a lot of those sort of things. And also working with, over the years, different types of organizations in different certain environments. The whole concept of what we now call segmentation, which is the technology that we work in, is something that, again, I've done since the beginning of networking. And Illumio is really the sort of the manifestation of all of that, because it's what we do. So I've been here about 5 years now. We're a relatively new company. But as I said, our focus is really on that whole working with critical infrastructure, be it banks, healthcare, manufacturing, telecoms, these sort of organizations, and also working with some of the largest logistics companies. So some of our biggest customers are major logistics companies. Obviously, I can't necessarily tell you the names, but you could probably guess. You could probably guess the sort of thing. And also, we have a number of airlines and ports and organizations like that within our customer base.
And you guys, I know, partner with IBM, and you're a global company. So even though you're relatively new, you're still checking all the boxes.
Yeah, and that's because, so it's an interesting one, because our customers are global. And for many years, cybersecurity was about putting a fence around something physically. So you would use a firewall. Most people know about firewalls. It's a box and you put it between the outside and the inside. But as organizations became global, as they become more diverse, as they became smarter, that approach needed to change. So it needed to become almost independent of where you are on the planet, so that the security you had was the same in Hong Kong as it was in Johannesburg, as it is in New York, as it would be in Paris. So I think that's been quite a big shift, and why we're able to support some of the largest organizations in the world, as well as some of the smallest.
I like it. I like it. So why did you join Illumio? I know we've talked about a little bit about the company, but you've done quite a bit in this space. What attracted you to the company?
I think it was, I was working for one of the largest security organizations, vendors in the world, that are advertised all over the place with Keanu Reeves. It was a great company, big organization, doing lots and lots of things. Whereas I started to see Illumio pop up in Zero Trust reviews and leading certain things and doing some exciting things. And I saw their growth over a period of time from the outside. And then an opportunity came up to actually join them again, about 5 years ago, maybe just over 5 years ago. And so some of the things that they were doing and the way that they do it was actually really exciting. And I could see that this is a technology that's going to grow and develop. And I've over the years developed quite a good nose for new things and companies. I can look at a company and go, yeah, that's going to go somewhere, or that's just a fashion. So, so I spoke to a lot of people external, because obviously I've been around the industry a while. I spoke to people who I knew in the organization and decided, yeah, this is something that is going to be really important as we move forward.
Yeah, I've been working just as long as you have, and I always look at my career as catching the next wave, because certain things you're doing, certain things I started off my career in, no longer get done. The technology does it somehow. I was in automotive, but there was always something that was like, boy, if you understand this system, I was mostly CAD systems. If you understand that system and GDT, you'll get paid this much money. So I kept getting that next wave. And then, I look at a lot of the waves that I was on are long gone, but important in your career. Let's switch gears and talk. What is ransomware for people who don't know, who don't soak in that all day?
Yeah. So ransomware is it's a type of cyber attack. It's a type of attack, and it's become very popular. And every time you read a report on an attack, and there's probably an attack at least every day, and the cybersecurity news is full of those attacks. People say, "Oh, it's ransomware," and it covers a lot of things. And on one side, it's where an attacker will encrypt your data so that you can't get access to it, and you have to pay them money to release it. So they'll encrypt the data, and then they may send you a key to unencrypt it. And you hope that works and that you get your data back. On the other side, it's using a similar technique, but to disrupt your business. So they may say, we're going to stop your business. And unless you pay us a huge amount of money, you're not going to be able to function. You're not going to be able to operate. And this was a bit like, there was an attack last year on the post office in the UK, and they were unable to ship parcels to Europe for a few days. And there's actually, it's quite an interesting thing, because a lot of organizations, security organizations, got involved in effectively negotiating the ransom to allow them to get back into operation. So I think when you're looking at say, a bank or a hospital or something like this, then not getting access to your data is quite an impediment. But what we see in a lot of transport and logistics, not being able to operate is much of a struggle. I met someone who was in vegetable shipments, and they do carrots and soy and all sorts of different things. And they said, actually, if someone steals our customer database, we don't really care. But if we can't ship our product, it rots. So it becomes that important to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the stuff that came up in the cybersecurity conference that I was at is that here in the United States, and I don't know if it's worldwide, but a lot of the hackers are from China, and they're trying to hack into everything now. And power grids, stuff like that, we've become very soft. And if we don't have internet, for the most part, we can't do work. But in the hot months, a lot of the people who are older, who depend on air conditioning and need machines to keep them alive, it just gets very ugly very quick. And we've experienced it.
Yeah, it's interesting because people talk about China and North Korea and these things. So there's three distinct groups of attackers. Everyone talks about nation state attackers. And the thing with that is, generally, if someone attacks you and they ask for money, it's unlikely to be a nation state.
Good to know.
They're more interested, you're right, in being able to stop power grids and have an impact like that. Then you've got the big cyber gangs, and we hear about those, and they appear and disappear, and they exist in China, in North Korea, in Russia, in Iran. And actually, they probably exist everywhere. But obviously, we just talk about those. And they may be protected by the regime, but they are literally there to make money. So that's a money-making exercise. And then the third group you get is a more modern thing, which are known as hacktivists. So these are people who are protesting against oil, or they're protesting against something and they want to cause disruption, or they just want to do mischief.
Love that.
So they're your three groups of ransomware actors that you're
right, and they different motives. So to summarize, the nation state people are potentially trying to hurt your country. The cyber gangs are just trying to make money, and the hacktivists have a cause that.
And generally that's not. Again, they're not necessarily money driven. They'll attack you and say, unless you shift all your trucks to running on electricity, we're going to cause you problems.
And so with ransomware, it's generally going to be these cyber gangs?
It's mostly the cyber gangs, but it could be anyone. Yeah, it could be any of those three.
So
because the challenge is you can go online to what they call the dark web, and you can literally just buy ransomware that you can use.
Oh, boy. Yeah, and I've said this before, and there's certainly no shame in any of this. I've talked to companies who've had ransomware attacks, and what they told me was that it's changing, but they said there used to be an ethic to it, which is I want 30%, and I think that was a similar number across the board. 30% of your last year's revenue, you have to give it to us before we give you your company back. And I've heard, we talked about it before we hit the record button, that all of those gentlemen rules are long gone. Now they're just destroying these companies over and over again.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because we worked recently with a research organization called the Ponemon Institute, and they do lots of analytics into costs of attacks and things like this. And we did a report with them called the Cost of Ransomware report, and they do it every sort of 2 or 3 years. And so one of the sort of the questions and the subject areas in there was around, did you pay the ransom? And if you paid the ransom, did you get your business back? And did they come back again and attack you again? And it was really interesting, the sort of the reasons and the balances, why certain people pay the ransom, why people didn't pay the ransom, how much of their business they got back, and did they come back? And the reality is that obviously everyone is encouraged not to pay the ransom in case they come back. Sometimes organizations have to pay you get to a point you go, actually, I'm desperate for this, I need to pay the ransom. But the reality is that even if you do all of the right things, you pay the ransom and all that, it's rare that you actually get all your business back because either they don't give it to you or they keep it and sell the information on the web anyway, or the backups and the processes that organizations have to protect themselves aren't good enough and they lose data. So there is this whole thing about how do you act? What do you do with the ransom? And do you trust the organization? No, never trust them, obviously, but just try and do your best.
That makes sense. So how are they normally being asked to be paid? Are they asking send money to this account? Is it cyber? Is it Bitcoin? How are they paying these guys?
Yeah, mostly Bitcoin. Yeah, a lot of Bitcoin. Some of these ransoms are millions and millions of dollars. That's a challenge for a lot of organizations.
I'm assuming none of it's ever recovered.
Some gangs get taken down. There's been a case, but again, they just move and pop up again.
Yeah. And it just seems to me when you're dealing with people who are criminals like this and you say, okay, I held up my end of the bargain. I gave you your $30 million. So now all you need to do is do what you said you were going to do. I think they're going to be more focused on getting that money safe in their hands and not worried about putting your business back online.
Yeah, it's from a business perspective. And if you distance yourself and look at it from a business perspective, if you as a ransomware gang are not giving people back their business, no one's going to pay. So it's bad business to do that. But the trouble is, you're right, that whole ethics of, okay, here's your business, but I'm going to come back next week and do the same thing again is a challenge.
Yeah, and once they're in, how do you know they're ever out?
Well, that's right.
So I know this is a very big question, but how are they even getting into our systems? And I know there's small companies and big companies and public and private and global and local. But generally speaking, what are the challenges that we have in keeping the bad guys out?
So the most popular way that they get in is through what they call phishing. So this is effectively sending an email that contains a link to the ransomware. And the challenge is that it used to be that you'd receive an email where the grammar was terrible and it was misspelled and it was just so obvious that it was the whole, my brother's a prince in Nigeria and he's got lots of money type stuff. But over the years, they've got much, much better at that. And now with AI, they produce like deep fakes. So a lot of the time here's an email from your CEO saying, click here because I need you to do something. The other thing is that always those attacks come with a level of urgency. So again, you may get an email from the executive assistant of the CEO saying, oh, the CEO's traveling. He's out. He's just about to get on a plane. He needs you to do this within the next 10 minutes. So those like phishing emails, and they come through WhatsApp now. They come as texts. They come through all sorts of methods.
Oh, they get everywhere.
They get everywhere. And so that's the way that they get into the organization to start with.
So when I get like an email, and I get everybody else, I get those emails. And so I use Microsoft Outlook. So I receive an email. And why isn't any of my security knocking that phishing attack out before it gets to my inbox?
It's probably, if you think about it, there's been a big rise in email security sales, and it was a technology that people used years ago that coming back around again. And they're probably stopping 99% of all of the phishing emails that you get, but only one has to get through. If you're the defender, you've got to be right all the time, whereas the attackers only have to be right once. So,
Now, with those phishing attacks, that mean I have to actually open it up and click on it, or is it just opening it up, get them in the systems?
It depends. Sometimes just opening it releases the attack. So that's always the challenge. Sometimes you emails and you think, even in your own head, you're thinking that looks a bit iffy. I'm not going to open it. I'm just going to send it to my security team in the organization and they can take the risk of opening it. But it is very sophisticated, these attacks. And again, the other the sort of the other aspects of that is that people can get in through, not faults, that's not the right word, but weaknesses in your security system. You could have a firewall where the license hasn't been renewed, because you have to pay licenses for firewalls. And if you haven't renewed that and it's 2 weeks out of date, that could happen. If you've got gateways where they haven't been patched, or there's a lot of, especially web gateways that people can use to get into the organization. And then I guess the third one is the insider threat. So the potential of an attack coming from a supplier or via a supplier, not them attacking you, but them suffering an attack and it getting into your organization. Or even the gangs have actually placed an employee into your organization or a contractor or something like this. And that happened a lot during COVID, because we got to a point where when you were hiring someone, all the interviews were over video. You never met the person. So they could lie about where they were, but literally they could be sitting in North Korea or China or something like this, pretending to be in Philadelphia, and they're actually working for a ransomware gang. And there's the reports of that, of where the police turned up at these places and there were literally just groups of people on multiple screens working for multiple companies doing bad things.
Yep. And these weren't hacks, but not so long ago, we had Microsoft and the airlines. I think that was last summer. There was a vulnerability. I think it was CrowdStrike that just didn't update. Something wasn't updated, or a bad update. And so those vulnerabilities can happen to even the very best companies. And then I think a few weeks before that, AT&T got hacked. And my thought is, when you hear Microsoft and the airlines and AT&T, you look and say, those are companies that value their technology and they value security, and it still happens.
Yeah, literally can happen to anyone. And a lot of those, again, the gangs and those are very aware of the organization. So they've probably been using, AI-driven reconnaissance tools for a long time to understand exactly where they can get and what type of information they can get and things like that. So the ability of these guys to get into places and move around inside them is quite a big challenge.
So there's so many people listening on my podcast who are logistics guys, supply chain guys, and they say, we buy technology, but then we always have I always call them, get the killer apps, whether it's a pricing tool or a visibility tool that plugs in via API. And we were so excited in the last decade to say, there's no long integration, Trevor. All I have is I have an API and boom, we connect. And I joked about it because I'm not a technical guy. I did not know what an API was. And I remember people kept saying it to me. And I said, no one really knows. We just use it to describe something that happens quickly. And one of the things I heard somebody say recently was, yeah, those having APIs is great, but make sure that API meets your standards. Wait a day, do the actual rigorous assessment before you connect. And I was like, oh, yeah. So some of the great solutions we've come up with to make our life easier are causing us grief.
Yeah, that's always a classic. And APIs are great. Application programming interfaces are great things, because a lot of the time, if you had two applications or two processes and you needed them to talk, then there was a big chunk of programming that needed to happen.
10 weeks and $100,000.
By publishing your APIs, or the way to, you're effectively saying, you speak French, I speak English, but here's how to talk to me in your language or my language. And so it makes life so much easier. And those APIs exist not only in applications, but in security products as well, because it allows security products to talk to each other, to exchange knowledge and information to improve that whole piece. But you have to make sure that your API is secure in the same way that everything else is. So again, it's that zero trust. Make sure that if anyone is using your API, you understand who it is and what they're doing. Don't allow random people to connect to it.
Yeah, and the nature of logistics is sometimes we don't even meet our customers in person. They're on the other side of the world or the other side of the country. And a lot of times we don't meet our suppliers because they're picking up at a location 500 miles from me and delivering to another location 1,000 miles away from me. And the in-person part doesn't happen. And so I think it brings me back to the whole thing with when you hand the server your credit card, you don't know them you know them because you see them once in a while at the restaurant. We really don't know who they are. And that's the same. Zero trust makes a lot of sense in our business, even though we call logistics, and I think all business is, there was that old, I think it was Ronald Reagan used the old Russian term, which I think was trust but verify. A technologist recently said on my podcast, verify then trust.
That is the change. It's don't trust until you're verified. And it's interesting because there's another attack that we see a lot that is a lot of the time targeted into the legal industry called a man in the middle attack, where effectively because lawyers during mergers and acquisitions are dealing with all the money or even house purchases or things like this, the bad guys can intercept emails and effectively then modify them. So if it says, okay, this transaction is happening, the money here, they can intercept that, change the bank account, and then forward it to these people. And these people say, it's come from Bob. I know I've known Bob for 20 years, but it's been tampered with. There is that whole thing. So it all comes down to that whole thing about mitigating the impact. It's, okay, some of this bad stuff is going to happen to us at some point. We have to make sure that when it does happen, it's not going to stop our business running. And it always comes back to that point.
Right. So I'm going to summarize a little bit, and then I want to get into what you guys do to prevent this. So how they get in is the phishing. It's some vulnerability in your system, a weakness, a risk. It could be an API. It could be something was missed along the way. You might not have turned off somebody's logins after they were there. You might have hired somebody or worked with somebody that was shady. And you said it's the basics. We got to do the basics, and they'll keep us safe most of the time. And it's getting your systems updated, strong passwords. I still hate the way I have. I think I have 1,000 passwords, and then everyone's they have to all be different. You're like, of course they do. And God forbid I ever die and my kids have to get into systems.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting because you can use all these password managers now and they're very good. But I do tend to write a lot down in a book because whatever you're doing, you ain't going to see my book.
So do the basics and get the basics right. And then I want to talk to you real quick before we get into what you guys do. The idea of insurance. I like that idea. And I've heard somebody say this, is that when you get insurance for anything, the insurance company wants to make sure you're doing the right thing. So they're going to have a checklist and say, we want to know before we insure you that you're doing this and this. Otherwise, we won't insure you. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, cyber insurance is a growing thing. And it's some organizations have it, some don't. They're working out how much is it going to cost us and all of that sort of stuff. And like any insurance company, they're looking at risk. So are you a high risk? Are you a low risk? And to a certain extent, if you do things like do all of the basics and you put in all the right security controls, you become a lower risk. If you can, again, it's all about resilience. If you can boost that, then you become a lower risk. But it's interesting that, again, going back to, this cost of ransomware report, that some organizations pay the ransom because they are insured. I go, that's fine. I'll pay that ransom because I've got cyber insurance. But obviously that's going to put your insurance premiums up next time.
And I got to think your insurance company is going to, after a while, say the goal is not to pay those.
Let's not do this anymore. Yeah. And I think that to a certain extent that the cyber insurance industry can have a positive impact by specifying levels of security controls that you need. It could be that you're using ISO 27001 or CIS, or whatever those things happen to be. And it's in a lot of industries are very regulated, critical infrastructure type things around the world. But in unregulated environments, then actually the cost of cyber insurance is higher because you're not necessarily complying with those sort of things. So I think on the whole, cyber insurance is a good thing, but you need to make sure that you're keeping your premiums down by reducing the risk.
And they're not going to insure you if you're doing everything wrong. They're going to want to make sure you're doing the basics at least and maybe more. Let's get into what you guys do. And again, you guys are the Zero Trust in action. If somebody says, Trevor, I heard you speaking, you scared me to death, I need this. I want to work with Illumio. What does that look like, and what are you mitigating?
We do things at several levels. As we said, it's all about improving your resilience and reducing risk. And what we're doing is we're, I guess, using a lot of the built-in technologies that are in operating systems or the cloud or containers or any of these sort of technologies. And the first thing that we do is collect data from those so that when we're saying, okay, where are all your vulnerable systems? We can visualize that on a map. We can see where there are high-risk connections. We can see lots and lots of information. And we can very simply bubble that up into a ransomware dashboard that says, okay, your score is this, you need to go and fix these problems and fix those problems. And then that comes up as an improvement in your score. So we have a lot of information that we're collecting that you can use AI tools on, for instance, to see what's happening within your environment. And that gives you the knowledge to then put policies in place. So what we're doing is effectively, if you think about what's a good analogy, if you compare a ship to a truck. So in theory, a ship could go absolutely anywhere in the sea. And in cybersecurity terms, that's a risk because it literally could go and connect to anything out there. Whereas in reality, a truck has to go on a road. If we can put the controls, effectively checkpoints on that road, we can check who's going in and out of somewhere. We can monitor that and we can stop. It may be that we want to stop red lorries but only allow blue lorries, that sort of thing. So by narrowing where traffic and where that data flows, then we can control exactly where a potential ransomware attack goes. So we're taking away its ability to go anywhere. We're controlling exactly where it goes, and we can then effectively stop it as it moves through. As we said, it's like you're saying, okay, here's a certain application and we're putting a ring fence around that and we're stopping that ransomware moving anywhere else. Because what that is doing is by containing that attack in that sort of smaller space, as we said, reducing the effective blast radius, then it means that we can actually recover the business that much quicker. We don't necessarily have to pay the ransomware because the attack hasn't reached our most critical assets, because we're still in business, because we're still running. So we can avoid paying the ransom literally by containing that attack and then using tools to clear out and get rid of the virus in there.
So I'm not a techie, but try and explain this. So if I have an ERP or a transportation management system that I'm using, how does Illumio connect to that?
Yeah, ERP is a great example, and we've done a lot with that sort of environment within banking and healthcare and logistics, because effectively what we're doing is we're saying, here's our ERP system, and that doesn't necessarily have to be in one place. It could be anywhere in the world. And we're saying that within that, within the underlying infrastructure of that ERP platform are a number of security controls that say allow, block. So what we're saying is, if something is part of that ERP system and it needs to talk to some other logistical management system, let's apply zero trust. So stop everything except for the allowed communication between those two things. So we're blocking everything except what we need to allow. So think of zero trust as a bit like the alternative. If what we used to do was to look at all traffic and try and identify the bad stuff and stop it, what we're doing in this environment is fundamentally only allowing the good stuff. So we're doing it the other way around, and there's a lot less good stuff than there is bad stuff. So we're not looking for the needle in the haystack. We've just got a stream of needles, and we're going to allow that to pass.
Yeah. Trevor, are you the host of the Illumio podcast?
I'm not, but I have my colleague.
The only reason I bring that up is I do a lot of podcasts. And when I do, every once in a while, I'm talking to a larger company, especially Fortune 500, and they'll say, oh, I can't get to your recording software. So we record this using Squadcast. And they say, I don't know why I can't get to that. And I was like, because you're a big company and Squadcast isn't approved. And so you have to go talk to your IT people and explain what you're doing. And that happens typically with the larger companies. So they basically, there's the same thing. That's the firewall saying that is a website that has no reason to connect here.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of organizations, they protect themselves by not allowing certain things to happen at certain points. And it's a bit like I'm talking to you on my laptop, but which has Illumio installed on it, and it prevents me doing things that allow me to connect to things inside my house, which on one side could be annoying, but on the other side is protecting my machine from what's going on a PlayStation or a Xbox or something like that, maybe on the same network. So you are restricting what can talk to what by doing this verify then allow approach.
I got a new camera and I was connecting it to Wi-Fi in my house. And then it was saying, would you like to connect this to your refrigerator? And I was thinking, yeah, is that part of the problem, is that we have the ability to connect it to a refrigerator and to, obviously in a work environment, we're not going to connect to refrigerators unless you're in that business. But basically we now say, oh, we have a smart, I don't know, cabinet or whatever. And it's more vectors for attack, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You think so? We're talking about refrigerator. You think of a refrigerated truck. There's a lot of sensors in there that if you're the controller for that environment, you're going to want to know, is the refrigeration in that truck working? And the way that's going to communicate is that's going to connect via basically the cell phone network back to your organization. So and even if you're looking at that, again, do you know that actually is your truck, or is it someone pretending to be your truck? So again, that whole making sure that the communication that is happening is what you expect it to be and not anything else. And it's very similar to ATMs in banks. They fundamentally connect either via the internet or a virtual private network or something like this. A lot of the time you're hoping it's not connecting to anything else. But actually the sensible thing is to control it and say you are not allowed to connect to anything else. So all of those things are really important in doing this. And it is that we have to do the basics well, because again, in this Costa ransomware report, when you looked at how did an attack move through the organization, it was frustrating the basics weren't done well. And I get quite passionate about this because it's a problem we should have solved years ago. Being able to identify where those issues are and fixing them, that gives you a big reduction in risk.
Trevor, I think, and I've been on the other side of it, I'm not from the information system side. And sometimes it feels, oh my God, these guys, all they have is restrictions. We have zero flexibility in this business because of this. And that's the wrong attitude to have, because this is the basics. This is the hygiene. If you don't do this right, you're not going to be in business.
And you're absolutely right. And you have to be quite rigorous with it, because I remember having a conversation recently with the chief security officer of an organization. And they were basically saying they got into an argument with the CEO of their organization because the CEO said, I can't access this, something. And the security guy went, yeah, but you've no reason to access that. Yeah, but I'm CEO. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Your machine is probably more targeted than anyone else's. So we need to restrict what your machine connects to, probably more than anyone else in the organization. So you have to put those restrictions in place, or you're going to cause yourselves all sorts of problems.
Oh, yeah. I'm familiar with this with our presidents, and I'm sure it applies to CEOs and others, but you can't use a phone that's not managed. And you think it's a personal call. I don't need everybody connected to my personal call. Perhaps you do, because maybe somebody's trying to connect, and the nature of it is once the conversation begins, it goes where it goes. And yeah, that's why I think you typically see the security people trump the CEO or the dignitary, because your job is to run the company. It's my job to make sure that nothing happens to the technology of this company.
Correct. Yeah.
So the implementation for Illumio, is this fast, slow? Please explain the process.
Yeah. So it's a software only product. So you're effectively deploying an application onto a machine, a server, a cloud entity, whatever it happens to be. And then you're using potentially a cloud-based application to control it. And so effectively, it literally is just sending information from Windows or Linux or one of those operating systems back to the control, which effectively then builds a map that you can see, and you can click on that map and apply rules, or you can use AI to generate rules and things like this. So it's, as I said, that makes it potentially quite quick and easy to deploy and use, and it really is easy to use. There is obviously some planning required, as it is with everything. So while you can do some things very quickly, very simply, you could go in there and say, block all the high risk connections. You can do that simply. A lot of the time, because within organizations, there is obviously a networking team, and there's an application team, and there's a security team, and all these people that need to get together and go, actually, we're going to put these rules in place. That means that can't talk to that anymore. So you're the application owner. Is that a problem? And so there's that level of organization within a company. And then the other thing is that organizations need to build and plan an incident response. What happens when there is an attack? And how do we test that? And how do we make sure it works? And all those sort of things. So while the technology is very easy to deploy, organizations need to make sure that they themselves are in a position to maximize a lot of those things. And this just isn't an Illumio thing. This is any technology. So a lot of the time people will deploy Illumio alongside a monitoring tool or whatever it happens to be. And so whatever security tools you're deploying, you need to make sure that you're understanding what the impact is and how to get the best from it. Because over the years, I've seen a lot of companies buy a lot of technology, and they turn it on and it hums, and it literally is just warming the planet up. It's not implemented properly or doing anything. Yeah. So again, it's as much about how an organization plans and builds a strategy for security as it is the technology.
Yes, I like that. I like it. There's a lot of people in the transportation logistics business in particular who've experienced what we call freight fraud here. And there's a whole bunch of various versions of it, but it starts with getting maybe a fake email, where I think this came from my trusted coworker, Trevor, but it actually came from something slightly different. And they're actually stealing freight. And sometimes there's ransomware. It's not ransom. They'll hold a container, a trailer, for ransom somewhere. This is that's not this kind of ransomware that we're talking about. But I believe using Illumio would prevent some of those untrusted partners from getting in touch with us.
Yeah, we talk about ransomware, but all of it is an extortion attack. So think about the big picture and you can get very technical about what's ransomware and what's not. It's an extortion attack, and they come in different shapes and sizes. And yes, absolutely, because we can do things like map work with organizations and map user information into what people then have access to. You can actually control and prevent some of these types of things from happening. But again, the reality is that if it's something like a man-in-the-middle attack where people are corrupting emails and stealing that type of thing, it's not always the case that everything can stop everything. As I said, it's always going to be when, not if. And while you may, as part of the attack, you may lose some of your business, the key to it is making sure you don't lose all of it.
I like when you say when, not if, because that is what I've heard. I heard that at the cybersecurity conference that I attended, and I've heard it from a number of the cybersecurity people I've talked to on my podcast. And you guys really have an approach of, let's try and prevent it in the first place, but if it does happen, let's contain it. And I think of it, maybe this is the wrong analogy, but I'll use it anyway. We've all seen the movie The Titanic where the water went over the walls. And somebody said, wait, don't the walls go to the top? If it was Illumio, the walls would go to the top.
That's absolutely right. There was a lot of things like the windows were open and all sorts of bad things. But yeah, fundamentally for us, the walls go to the top so that it doesn't overspill it as it sinks. So
right. Trevor, I'll make sure I put a link to your LinkedIn profile, a link to your website, and any of the links you and the marketing team give me. I would also, if you guys have it, I would love to share the cost of ransomware report that you referenced. And I'm going to try and summarize what we talked about here. Then I will get your final thoughts on the topic. So I'm talking to my friend Trevor Deering, and the topic today is Zero Trust in Action, Illumio's approach to ransomware defense. So I'm going to summarize the best I can, Trevor, and then I want to get your final thoughts. So we're talking about ransomware, and that's when somebody holds your company up. It's extortion. So they have most likely a cyber gang, and they have hacked into my system somehow, and they are going to ask for money. And when they're asking for that money, they may or may not come back. They may or may not give you your information back. So it is not, the problem didn't end there. And the way it begins was with phishing or weaknesses, bad API connections. Something was missed. Maybe you didn't turn off logins of an employee who was let go. Get the basics right. I heard that. It will, as you said, that'll get us 99% of the way there. But we're never going to be 100% safe from this problem. We need to do something about it. And what we need to do about it is get a solution like Illumio. Put a big old bow on this one, Trevor Deering. Final thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, I think ransomware is something that's actually been around a while. It's a top concern to a lot of organizations. And one of the big challenges is now that it has the capability to stop you working, stop you being in business. So you have to build up your capability to contain that attack, to make sure that it doesn't reach the parts of your business that actually mean that you're off the air. And you have to be able to mitigate the impact of those attacks.
Excellent. One last thing. What conferences will we see you and the fine folks from Illumio at?
Yeah, so we generally attend all the major sort of cybersecurity conferences, and we work very closely, as we said, with partners like IBM. And obviously where they're working in maybe transport and logistics conferences, then we'll support them in those sort of events. As a developing organization, obviously we can't be everywhere all the time, but we, as we said, we work with our partners and various industry bodies to promote the types of things that we do.
Excellent. Trevor, thank you so much for taking the time.
No problem.
And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.